Every generation is given one moment when heaven leans closer than usual. For our time, that moment came during a quiet mass in the papal chapel, when Pope Leo XIV lifted a chalice and saw not doom, but a last, burning invitation to love. Brothers and sisters, wherever you are hearing these words, from living rooms, chapels, subway cars, hospital beds, pause with me for a moment. Not to hear a rumor, not to chase a headline, but to stand at the edge of a single instant when heaven pressed itself against earth, and a pope could no longer stand beneath the weight of what he saw. I want to take you back to that instant. It is a Sunday morning the Church will never forget. The date is fixed in the Vatican archives, the hour recorded in a dozen security logs, 11:23 a.m., inside the papal chapel. Sunlight is pouring through stained glass, spilling veins of ruby and gold across white marble. Incense hangs in the air, the kind that smells like every Holy Week and funeral and Easter vigil compressed into one breath. 18 cardinals fill the front rows in scarlet. The choir has fallen silent. The chapel is so still you can hear the soft clink of a rosary bead against a ring. At the altar stands Pope Leo XIV. To the world, he is a figure in white, Bishop of Rome, successor of Peter, voice of over 1 billion souls. To the men closest to him that morning, he looks like something else, a tired shepherd who has carried too much sorrow, whose hands tremble not from age alone, but from the weight of what those hands are about to hold. Beside him, Cardinal Robert Saracen celebrates, his face carved with the calm of a man who has survived dictatorships and wars and yet still believes in the quiet power of a whispered Amen. The liturgy itself is simple, a mass of thanksgiving. No coronation, no canonization, no cameras, no crowds. Just a small chapel, a small host, a small circle of powerful men, and a God who has always preferred to arrive in silence. And yet, as the prayers rise like smoke and the bells give their soft, familiar chime, something begins to change. At first, no one could have named it. The air feels heavier and lighter all at once, as though the room is being emptied and filled at the same time. The space between words stretches. The sound of vestments brushing marble seems too loud. One of the altar servers will later swear he felt the hair on his arm stand up beneath the lace of his sleeves. It is as if an invisible curtain is being drawn back. The Pope reaches the heart of the Eucharistic prayer. "This is my body," he says, and he lifts the host above the altar, the white circle catching the flicker of candlelight. "This is my blood," he continues, and now he raises the chalice, gold, simple, familiar to him as his own hands. But in that instant, something utterly unfamiliar enters the room. Those who were there will later disagree about many things, but not about this. Time changed. Several will say it felt as if the chapel itself took a breath and then refused to exhale. The air turned strangely weightless, as though gravity had been turned down a notch. The distant hum of Vatican machinery, air vents, hidden elevators, security systems, seemed to vanish. One cardinal will never forget looking up and seeing the candle flames, not flickering, not dancing, but standing perfectly, unnaturally still, as if painted in the air. Pope Leo XIV's eyes rise above the chalice, locking onto a point no one else can see. His lips stop moving. A second passes. Then another. The deacon at his side shifts, uncertain. A few of the cardinals glance at their watches, then at one another. The chapel remains frozen, no cough, no rustle, no music. Only the silent white-robed figure at the altar, staring into something that is not on any liturgical schedule. What happens next will stretch across 7 indescribable minutes, minutes that will be dissected by doctors, spun by journalists, and prayed over by millions. Some will call it a fainting spell. Some will call it a collapse. Those who looked into his eyes afterwards will call it something else entirely. Because in that suspended moment, before his knees buckle and his tears begin to fall, Pope Leo XIV is granted a vision of what comes when the world forgets love. And to understand what he saw. The 5 shadows that passed over humanity, the church wounded from within, the world poised on the edge of its own ruin. We have to step behind that frozen instant and follow him into the story that began long before his body hit the marble. Quick moment, subscribe now. It helps the channel grow and guarantees you never miss the next release. It begins, as most revolutions do, in a room no one expects. By 10:47 a.m., the papal chapel had already begun to fill with red and white. Cardinals slip in quietly, their scarlet cassocks whispering against the marble floor. An altar server straightens the linen one last time, then steps back and folds his hands, trying not to stare at the empty chair that waits for the Pope. A shaft of light, angled just so, catches the dust and turns it into a slow, drifting snowfall. There is nothing unusual about any of this. The Vatican calendar calls it a Missa Gratiarum Actionis, a simple Mass of Thanksgiving. No cameras. No live broadcast. 18 cardinals were invited, a few monsignors, and a handful of staff. A small circle of power and prayer behind heavy doors the world will never see. At 11:09 a.m., Pope Leo XIV is still in his private chapel in the Apostolic Palace, vesting in silence. A master of ceremonies fastens the simple pectoral cross over his white alb. Another adjusts the chasuble, cream, with a narrow band of red running down the center. The Pope murmurs a prayer under his breath that none of them catch. He looks older up close than he does from balconies and screens. There are shadows under his eyes the makeup artists can't reach. His hands, once known for their steadiness during delicate liturgical actions, now quiver in small, almost apologetic tremors. But there is something else, the way he pauses after each small movement, as if listening for a sound beneath all other sounds. Holy Father, the master of ceremonies says softly, "They're waiting." Leo XIV nods. "Let them wait a little longer," he replies, but his tone is gentle, almost amused. Then he signs himself, inhales deeply, and steps out. At 11:18 a.m., the chapel doors open and everyone rises. The Pope walks in slowly, flanked by aides, preceded by incense and the thin, bright voice of a boys' choir singing the entrance antiphon. The room is small by Vatican standards, but to most people it would still feel like a jewel box, walls lined with frescoes, ceiling gilded in patterns that catch and fracture the light. Leo XIV pauses at the threshold for a heartbeat. Not out of fatigue, though many will assume it later, but to take it in, the faces, the color, the faint rattle in his chest that his doctors keep calling manageable. He bows, kisses the altar, and for a moment rests his fingertips on the cool marble longer than the rubric demands. Cardinal Robert Serra is already in place, standing slightly behind and to the side. His presence is solid, understated, another old man, another pair of tired eyes, another life spent watching empires and regimes and fashions rise and fall around the unchanging words of the Mass. 18 cardinals present, the prefect of the papal household notes silently, his mind half on the liturgy, half on the schedule. One pope, he adds, as if the number requires reassurance. The opening rites unfold with flawless precision. Kyrie. Gloria. The collect. The cadence of Latin, familiar yet always slightly foreign, ripples across the pews. The first reading, the psalm, the gospel proclaimed and kissed. The homily is brief, almost stark. Leo speaks softly about gratitude as a wound that stays open before God. If we thank only what we like, he says, we do not yet know the cross. A few of the cardinals shift in their seats. They are used to his meditations on suffering, but there is an edge to his voice today, a kind of fragile urgency. Still, nothing feels dangerous. Not yet. By 11:39 a.m., the liturgy of the Eucharist has begun. The gifts are brought forward, a small procession in a small space. A silver cruet. A basket of hosts. The Pope receives them with a faint smile that never quite reaches his eyes. The work of human hands, he says, his voice steady through the offertory prayer. Beside him, Cardinal Sarah's lips move in a whisper of assent, his gaze occasionally drifting upward to the stained glass. Red, blue, gold. Christ, the Apostles, a spray of lilies. The light has shifted slightly, and now it pours in at a lower angle, striping the floor with bands of color like a slow-motion sunset. Something in the air begins to change. It is subtle at first. The master of ceremonies becomes aware that he can hear his own breathing, louder than it should be. An usher feels his heart beating against the collar of his shirt. One of the cardinals suddenly realizes he cannot hear the buzz he is used to, the faint mechanical hum of the hidden systems that keep the Vatican running. The Eucharistic prayer begins. Leo XIV's voice sinks into the ancient rhythm. Father most holy, we give you praise. A few of the cardinals glance at him more closely now. There's a slight tremor at the corner of his mouth. His hands, extended over the gifts, look thinner than they did even a year ago. But his eyes, those are sharp, burning, fixed. The prayer moves forward, inch by inch, word by word, toward the center. On the night he was betrayed. This sentence always hits him harder than the rest, and today is no different. He pauses a fraction of a second longer than necessary, as if tasting the weight of betrayal in his own mouth. He took bread. The chapel is utterly still. A cough is stifled. A shoe scuffs quietly against stone and then falls still. Someone's rosary clinks once against a chair and then quiets as the hand that holds it tightens. At approximately 11:47 a.m., the first boundary is crossed. This is my body, which will be given up for you. The words are clear, unbroken. The Pope bends over the host, straightens, lifts it high above the altar. The thin white circle catches the light, becomes an oddly bright disk, the way certain stars appear brighter just before dawn. For those watching, this moment feels as it always does, sacred, dense, but familiar. He lowers the host, genuflects slowly, his right knee protesting slightly as it touches the marble. He rises with effort that most attribute to age, then reaches for the chalice. The gold cup feels heavier than usual in his hands. This is my blood. The words land differently inside him today. He feels them reverberate in his chest, vibrating in his bones, as though he is not merely pronouncing a formula but walking into a doorway, one that has always been there, but which today stands open wider than he has ever known. Which will be poured out for you and for many. The last word hangs in the air. He begins to raise the chalice. Later, when testimony is taken and retaken, when memories are sifted and resifted in the dim glow of interrogation rooms and confessionals, they will argue about exactly when it happened. Some will insist it was the moment the cup reached eye level. Others will say it was earlier, when his fingers first curled around the stem. A few will quietly confess that they felt it before any visible sign, felt something step into the room. But everyone agrees on this. The instant the chalice reached its full elevation, time changed shape. The cardinals in the first row feel it first. The sense that the light has thickened, as if the sun outside has stopped moving. A slight pressure in the ears, like the instant before a plane breaks through clouds. The sensation, not exactly sound, not exactly silence, that something vast has just tuned in. One of them glances at the candles on the altar. What he sees makes his mouth go dry. Their flames, which a moment earlier danced gently in the currents of air, now stand perfectly still. Not a quiver, not a sway. A painted fire. He looks at the Pope. Leo XIV is staring above the chalice now, not at it. His eyes are fixed on a point just beyond the invisible horizon of the altar, pupils dilated, irises dark. Then he stops moving. The words that were supposed to follow, "Do this in memory of me," never arrive. The deacon shifts, expecting a stumble, a cough, a whispered request for water. It does not come. The Pope remains frozen, arms extended, chalice raised, gaze locked on whatever has presented itself before him. A single second passes. Then another. By the time the 5th second ticks by, the master of ceremonies has started counting in his head. The chapel does not yet realize what is happening. Most assume a moment of prolonged reverence, a personal pause. The Pope has been known to linger in silence before. But this is different. No sound enters the room. No sound leaves it. The distant city, the Vatican gardens, the traffic on the other side of the walls, everything falls so far away it might as well belong to another planet. The altar server closest to the Pope feels his hands grow slick with sweat. For a moment, he thinks he might drop the bell. He glances up. The candle flames are still statues of fire. The chalice does not tremble. The Pope's chest does not rise. Concern has now woken in the eyes of the men in red. One cardinal leans forward slightly, his lips parting as if to speak, then thinks better of it. Another checks his watch, then stares at it as though the second hand might explain what the Pope's body cannot. The master of ceremonies takes a step closer to the altar, keeping within the boundaries dignity allows. "Sanctitas," he whispers, barely audible. No response. Pope Leo XIV's face is not slack like a man who has fainted. It is too focused, too intent. The muscles around his eyes are tense. The line of his jaw is set, as if he is bracing himself against something only he can see. Inside his skull, the chapel has already vanished. A widthless, soundless horizon opens before him, unfurling like a scroll. He does not yet see the details, those will come later, sharper than any nightmare. For now there is only an overwhelming sense of being seen, completely, by a gaze that passes through marrow and memory alike. fear has crossed the threshold. Someone in the back row mutters a prayer under his breath that does not appear in any liturgical book. A medic, stationed discreetly near the side door as protocol, feels the muscles in his legs coil. He asks himself whether rushing the altar of the living successor of Peter is a sackable offense. The Vatican gendarmes at the entrance exchange a look. One reaches for the radio on his belt, then stops when he notices his hands are shaking. A cardinal near the front realizes, with a sudden lurch of the stomach, that he has not actually seen the Pope breathe in several minutes. "Should we?" he begins, but no one wants to finish the sentence. On the altar, tears begin to appear at the corners of Leo XIV's eyes. They do not blink away. They do not fall yet. They simply gather, two small, fragile lenses, catching the light of the frozen candles. Inside, the vision sharpens. He sees not images at first, but movements, a tide pulling away from shore, leaving hearts exposed and dry. A great body, no, a bride, shot through with hairline fractures. Prayers spoken with lips while minds scroll glowing screens. Sanctuaries converted into stages. Children learning to measure their worth in likes and coins. Not yet the 5 shadows by name, but the weight of them, sliding silently across the face of the earth. 7th minute. Whatever spell of silence the room has been under is about to break. The master of ceremonies is no longer thinking of protocol but of resuscitation. He nods almost imperceptibly to the medic at the side door. The medic steps forward. The first tear finally breaks free and slides down the Pope's cheek. It is followed by another. And another. The chalice dips a fraction of an inch, his arms finally losing their unnatural stillness. His shoulders shudder once, hard, like a man returning from a very far distance in a single jolt. There is a collective inhale as the chapel remembers how to breathe. "Holy Father," someone calls. Leo XIV's fingers spasm. His grip loosens. The master of ceremonies reacts on instinct, darting forward, hand cupped beneath the chalice, catching it just as the Pope's knees buckle. The successor of Peter collapses to the marble. He does not fall forward onto the altar, as some nightmares will later replay it. He crumples to the side, curling toward the tabernacle, his hand stretching out as if to steady himself on the very presence he has just consecrated. Sobs tear loose from his chest. They are not dignified, papal tears. They are the ragged, raw sobs of a man who has seen something that should not exist and yet does, something that has already begun and cannot be unseen. His voice is gone. Mouth open, lungs heaving, he tries to form words. Nothing emerges but a hoarse, broken sound, not even a syllable, just the body's attempt to translate terror and awe. The medic is on his knees beside him now, fingers at the carotid artery, eye scanning pupil response. Pulse present, he reports, dizzy with relief. Responsive, partially. He's not unconscious, He doesn't have a word for what the Pope is. The cardinals cluster, then force themselves to step back, making space. Someone quickly covers the chalice and host. Someone else draws the small curtain around the altar, an instinctive attempt to protect the mystery, to hide the spectacle. The Mass never formally concludes. In its place, a different kind of liturgy begins, one of alarms, radios, urgent footsteps, whispered Hail Marys, and eyes that will never again see this room as simple stone and glass. The first official report is written within the hour. At approximately 11:47 a.m., His Holiness Pope Leo XIV experienced a transient loss of strength during the celebration of the Holy Mass in the Papal Chapel. Immediate medical attention was provided. The Holy Father remained conscious throughout and has since been stabilized. Preliminary assessment indicates an episode of fatigue exacerbated by recent workload and age. Vital signs are within acceptable parameters. Further tests are ongoing. The statement is polished, softened, translated, and released to the world as a brief note. The Holy Father experienced a brief loss of strength during Mass today due to fatigue. His condition is stable. Screens flash the word collapse before the press officers can object. Doctors speak of blood pressure, stress, cardiological evaluations. Television panels nod solemnly over graphics of the papal coat of arms. Commentators dig up footage of previous pontiffs leaning on canes, repeating the same phrase, the burden of the office. Inside the Vatican walls, behind doors that cameras cannot breach, another narrative is quietly beginning to take shape. Because the men who were closest to him when he fell, who saw the way his eyes looked not vacant but overfull, who felt the electric sting in the air as they touched his shoulders, know that whatever happened at that altar does not fit any medical chart they have ever seen. They do not yet call it a vision. Not out loud. Not yet. Night falls on the apostolic palace with its usual deliberate grace. Lights blink off in one wing, then another. The last tourists trickle out of St. Peter's Square. The Swiss Guard switch posts with a stamp of boots and a muted clink of halberds. In a private room high above the city, Pope Leo XIV sits alone. The monitors have been rolled away, most of the doctors dismissed for the night. A nurse has left a glass of water within reach, though his hands still shake too much to trust his grip. The physician-in-chief has advised rest, a reduced schedule, absolute minimization of stressors. On the bedside table, someone has placed the same chalice he held that morning. Its gold surface reflects the lamplight in soft, liquid curves. He stares at it as if it is a living thing. His cassock is unbuttoned at the throat. The white of his undershirt shows through, wrinkled. He looks smaller without the ceremonial layers, more like an old parish priest than the head of a tiny, fiercely watched state. There is a knock at the door. "Enter," he whispers. His confessor enters quietly, closing the door behind him with the instinctive care of a man used to secrets. He has known Leo XIV since long before the white sacchetto, long before the world turned his name into a symbol. The Pope does not bother with pleasantries. He lifts his eyes from the chalice to the man he trusts with what no communique will ever contain. "What did the doctors say?" the confessor asks gently. "That I am tired," Leo replies. There is a ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "This may be the first diagnosis they have given me that is not entirely wrong." Silence stretches between them, comfortable and heavy. The confessor steps closer, pulling a chair to the bedside. "You frightened them," he says. "I frightened myself," Leo answers. He reaches for the chalice, then stops, the tremor in his hand more from emotion than weakness now. "I remember every second," he says, voice barely above a whisper. "Not as you remember a dream. As you remember a wound." The confessor says nothing. He knows better than to put words into a man's mouth when that man has just watched his own collapse replayed 1,000 times on the evening news. Leo XIV turns the chalice slowly, watching the light move. When I lifted it, he says at last, he lifted something from me. A veil, a protection I did not know was there. His eyes grow distant. I saw, he continues, what comes when the world forgets love. The sentence hangs in the room like incense, spreading into every corner, sinking into the walls. It is not the kind of line that makes a press release. It is not a diagnosis, or a medical term, or a policy position. It is not even entirely clear what it means. But in the days and months to come, that single whispered confession will become a fault line. Because from that night forward, the collapse at the altar will no longer be just an old man's weakness in the face of a heavy schedule. It will be the opening scene of something far larger. A vision that names 5 shadows creeping across humanity. A church forced to look at its own wounds. And a world standing closer to the edge than it dares to admit. And the man who fell to his knees in front of a chalice will rise, not as a ceremonial figure, but as a witness. The Mass that stopped time is over. What is set in motion has only just begun. The Mass that stopped time is over. What is set in motion has only just begun. The first meeting takes place 3 days after the collapse. It is held in a small, wood-paneled room deep within the Apostolic Palace, the kind of room that remembers older popes and older crises. A crucifix hangs on one wall, darkened by decades of candle smoke. A solitary window looks out over a slice of sky and a section of tiled roof. The door is thick, the lock new. 5 men sit around the table with Pope Leo XIV. None of them are there by accident. There is Cardinal Robert Sarah, his hands folded atop a thin leather notebook. The Secretary of State, weighing every word before he speaks it. The papal physician, still carrying the faint smell of antiseptic. The head of the Vatican gendarmerie, back straight, eyes constantly mapping exits. And the Pope's confessor, who says the least but hears the most. Leo XIV looks smaller in this room than he did at the altar. He is in a simple white cassock, no mozzetta, no stole. His face is lined, the shadows beneath his eyes deeper than they were even a week ago. Yet there is a strange brightness around him, the way a candle looks not larger, but more intense, when its wick has burned down. "Thank you for coming," he says quietly. They murmur the expected responses. Of course, Holy Father. Always, Holy Father. He raises a thin hand, and the words fall away. "You all saw what happened in the chapel," he begins. "You know the official version. Fatigue. An episode. I permit them to say these things. Age must be good for something." A small ripple of nervous laughter travels around the table and dies quickly. "But you also saw my face," he continues. "You felt the air in that room. You know there was more." Cardinal Sarah nods once, a slow and deliberate motion. The Pope's confessor lowers his gaze to his folded hands, as if bracing himself. The physician clears his throat. "Holy Father, from a clinical perspective, an altered state of consciousness can." Leo XIV holds up a hand again, gently but firmly. "Doctor," he says, "I do not deny that my body was weak. But what I am about to tell you did not come from my heart or my brain misfiring. It did not feel like a dream or a stroke. It felt like having my eyes opened for the first time." He leans back, exhaling slowly. I saw the world, he says, as if through the eyes of eternity. The words land heavily in the room. No one writes them down, but each man knows he will remember them as long as he lives. "What did you see, Holy Father?" the Secretary of State asks, his voice calm, but his knuckles white around his pen. "A world emptied of love," Leo replies. "Not entirely. Not yet. But leaking it, losing it, like a ship taking on water. I saw hearts made for God turned inward on themselves. I saw our church trying to shine while hiding its wounds. I saw currents, movements, shadows." He pauses, looking at the crucifix on the wall as if to steady himself. "They were not demons in the way we paint them," he says slowly. "No wings. No pitchforks. No theatrical drama. They were patterns. Distortions in the human heart. Like dark winds blowing across the surface of humanity." He looks each of them in the eye in turn. There were 5. He lifts his right hand and begins to count them on his fingers, like a teacher naming lessons a child must never forget. First, disbelief. Not the honest struggle of a soul seeking truth, but a hardened refusal to be surprised by God. I saw people who could recite prayers but no longer expected them to be answered. A world that believes only in what it can measure, even as it suffocates beneath what it cannot. Second, division. Lines carved between nations, between races, between neighbors, between siblings in Christ. In my vision, it was like a spiderweb of cracks running through the body of humanity and through the body of the church. Every argument became an identity. Every disagreement, a war. Third, desecration. Not only of altars and relics, but of human bodies, of marriages, of the poor, of the earth itself. Things once held sacredly are treated as disposable. People are treated as things. Worship turned into performance. The holy traded for profit. Fourth, despair. A cold weight pressing on chests, making it hard to breathe. Young people convinced the future is a curse, not a promise. Men and women forgetting that mercy exists, that forgiveness is possible, that anyone is waiting for them. He pauses before the 5th. And finally, deception. This word he does not speak lightly. Not just the lies told by politicians or criminals, he says, but the lies we tell ourselves. A world convinced that sin is freedom, that loneliness is independence, that screens are relationships, that God is either dead or indifferent. Even within the church, words of truth spoken without love, distorted until they become something else. He lowers his hand. These 5 shadows, he says softly, are not creatures. They are movements of the heart, spreading silently. They move through systems, through families, through our own councils and congregations. They were everywhere. Silence settles over the room like dust. The head of the gendarmerie shifts, uncomfortable in a conversation where there is nothing to guard against with a weapon. "And you are sure," the Secretary of State says carefully, "that this was not an illusion? A hallucination?" Leo finishes for him. I asked myself the same. And perhaps if it were only images I had seen, I could be persuaded. But it was not only images. It was knowing. A clarity. It felt like being shown the diagnosis of a body we have been pretending is healthier than it is. He smiles sadly. Besides, he adds, look out the window. Tell me I invented these things. They all glance, almost involuntarily, at the thin strip of Roman sky. Cars move like ants below, tiny and oblivious. Somewhere, a siren wails. A man on a rooftop smokes, alone. The Pope's confessor finally speaks. What do you believe God is asking of you, in light of this? He asks. Leo XIV closes his eyes. To tell the truth, he says, first to you, then to the Church, then to the world. The Secretary of State inhales sharply. Holy Father, with respect, he says, we must proceed with prudence. If we announce that the Pope has had a vision of global spiritual decay, of 5 shadows, there will be panic. Or ridicule. Or both. The media will devour it. Politicians will twist it. Some will call for your resignation. Others will demand miracles. We must think of the stability of the Church. Stability without truth is just a nicely arranged lie, Leo murmurs. The physician clears his throat again. Could we not, he suggests, frame this as a spiritual reflection born from your recent episode? Something more poetic than prophetic. Cardinal Sarah shifts forward. Holy Father, he says, voice low but firm, I was there. I felt it. He is not speaking poetry. Leo looks at him gratefully. I will not rush, he says. I will not shout. But I will not pretend this was nothing. The world may call it collapse. We know better. We know it was a revelation too heavy for one man to carry in silence. He looks around the table, his gaze gentle but unyielding. I ask only one thing for now, keep this in your hearts, he says. Pray with it. Test it. But do not bury it. Truth has a way of climbing out of the graves we dig for it. They all nod. Some out of conviction. Some are out of duty. Some because they do not yet know what else to do. Outside, the bells of St. Peter's ring the hour. Inside, a fault line has opened. The official story moves forward as if nothing has changed. Doctors give interviews, carefully scripted, about the Pope's resilience, his admirable recovery, his need for rest. A press release notes his remarkable good spirits and gratitude for the prayers of the faithful. Behind the cameras, the same doctors sign off on more tests, more scans, more cautious language. Fainting spell, they say. Transient episode. No permanent damage. Secrecy becomes policy. A memo circulates quietly, references to vision, apparition, or mystical experience are to be avoided in all official communications. If asked, staff are to speak of fatigue and overwork. Nothing more. In the corridors and courtyards, however, another vocabulary spreads. He saw something, one cardinal whispers to another in the shadow of a colonnade. I have never seen him look like that, another replies. It was not a faint. He was somewhere else. A Monsignor who helped carry the Pope from the chapel confides to a friend that he felt as if he were touching a wire alive with current. A Swiss guard, sworn to silence, writes in his private journal that the air in the chapel felt like the air before lightning strikes. Small comments, scattered like seeds, begin to sprout. A journalist with a contact in the Curia posts a cryptic line on social media, rumors of a mystical episode in the papal chapel. Is the Vatican hiding something? The tweet is deleted within an hour, but screenshots circulate. A gossip site runs a headline, "Did the Pope see a vision?" The official spokesperson sighs, denies, and redirects. "No, no," he says, smiling into the cameras. The Holy Father is a man of deep prayer, of course, but what happened was medical. Nothing more. The word "more" does a lot of work in that sentence. The first sign comes a month later. It begins like any other fire alarm in any other city, a shrill, insistent sound slicing through the morning. A historic cathedral in a European capital, caught in the cool light of dawn, begins to burn. No one sees the exact moment the flame catches. Later, investigators will trace it to an electrical fault, a spark behind an ancient wall. The cause will be declared accidental. But to the people who watch from the street as smoke pours from the roof and flames lick at stone that has stood for centuries, it does not feel like an accident. The news spreads fast. Images flood screens, the spire collapsing in a shower of embers, firefighters silhouetted against roaring light, statues being carried out in hurried processions like evacuees from a war. The world has seen scenes like this before, but it never gets used to them. What most channels do not show, at least not at first, is the altar. In the chaos, someone records a short, shaky video on a phone, the cathedral's great crucifix, behind the main altar, bathed in heat. The wooden corpus blackens, curls, and finally melts in on itself, the arms dropping as if too heavy to hold. The clip leaks online before officials can stop it. Within hours, it is everywhere. In a small room in the Vatican, a cardinal watches the footage on a tablet, his face pale. He knocks once on the door of the Pope's study and enters without waiting for an answer. "Holy Father," he says, voice tight, "you should see this." Leo XIV watches the cross dissolve into char and ash. His hand tightens around the arm of his chair. "Disbelief," he murmurs. The cardinal looks at him, puzzled. "The cathedral was full on Easter," he says. "Full of tourists with cameras. Full of people who came to listen, not to adore. A house of God turned into a backdrop for photographs." He does not say this as condemnation, but as diagnosis. When the sacred is treated like scenery, he says softly, it will burn, sooner or later. The fire is not always made of flames. The cardinal shivers. The second sign arrives in the belly of the earth. A tremor rattles a holy city in the Middle East, one already accustomed to the sound of sirens and the sight of soldiers. The earthquake is not large enough to topple skyscrapers or erase neighborhoods. But it is strong enough to crack the pavement outside shrines, to shake their domes, to send small showers of stone from ancient walls. In one shrine, a camera mounted near the entrance captures an odd moment. Visitors from 3 different religions, who a second earlier were walking in neat, separate clumps, lurch at the same time, grab for balance, and end up clutching each other, Jewish, Christian, Muslim hands gripping arms and shoulders in a tangle. For 3 seconds, they are one frightened organism. Then the shaking stops. They let go quickly, embarrassed, each retreating to their designated side. The clip surfaces online. Some call it a touching image of unity. Others mock it as earthquake ecumenism. The arguments flare and fade. In his private chapel, Pope Leo sees the footage. Division, he sighs. Even when the earth itself shakes, we cling to our walls. The third sign comes from the sun. A massive solar flare erupts without warning, flinging charged particles toward the earth. It scrambles radio communications across parts of Europe. Air traffic controllers switch to backups. Satellites glitch. For a few hours, phone networks stutter. Internet connections falter. In a world that thinks in terms of always online, the sudden fragility feels like a slap. News anchors joke about going analog. Conspiracy theorists proclaim it a government test. Scientists give calm explanations about magnetic fields and solar cycles. In a rural Italian village, a shepherd notices something else. For the first time in years, the sky at night is clear of the faint orange glow of distant cities. He can see more stars. In the Vatican, someone mentions the flare in a briefing. The Pope listens, fingers pressed together. Desecration, he whispers. Holy Father, the Secretary of State asks. We have consecrated our lives to these devices, Leo says. We hold them more often than rosaries. We bow our heads before them more easily than before God. When the sun coughs and they fall silent for an hour, we panic more than when our neighbor weeps. He closes his eyes. We have turned tools into idols, he says. Desecration is not only what we do to the altar. It is what we do to the image of God in ourselves. The fourth sign is quieter. In a monastery that has stood for nearly 1,000 years, a relic long venerated as a fragment of a martyr's bone begins to move in its sealed glass reliquary. The movement is small, barely perceptible, a faint rotation, a slight shifting against the silk cushion beneath. At first, the nuns who tend the chapel think it is their imagination. But over days, they notice it more clearly. One evening, as they chant Compline, the reliquary emits a soft, inexplicable sound, a tiny crack, as if glass were responding to pressure no hand has applied. Word reaches a local bishop, who sends a commission. They test the glass. They examine the casing. They look for vibrations from traffic, from construction, from nearby machinery. They find nothing. News of the phenomenon leaks out. Pilgrims begin to arrive, praying for miracles. Some claim to feel a strange warmth when they kneel before the relic. Skeptics roll their eyes, writing think pieces about medieval superstition in a modern age. A headline on a secular site reads, "Holy bone wobbles, Internet loses its mind." Pope Leo smiles faintly when he sees it. Despair and deception, he says. The relic stirs, as if to say, I am still here. We treat it as a trick, or a circus. We do not know how to live with signs that do not fit our stories. He grows quieter by the day. In the weeks that follow, Leo XIV withdraws. Public audiences are cancelled for health reasons. The Wednesday crowds in St. Peter's Square thin, their disappointment masked by sun hats and smartphones. Diplomats are rescheduled. Interviews postponed. Whatever fatigue the Vatican announced seems to have deepened. Guards posted near his private chapel report hearing him late into the night. Sometimes it is the murmur of prayer, low and steady. Sometimes it is silence so thick they check their watches to ensure time has not stopped again. Once, a young Swiss guard swears he hears something else, the unmistakable sound of a man weeping. Like someone who had lost everyone, he tells a friend, unable to find better words. Inside, the Pope stands before the tabernacle, rosary wrapped twice around his fingers, lips moving. Lord, he prays, you showed me what comes when love is forgotten. Show me now what comes when love is remembered. Do not let me speak only of shadow. Show me how to walk into it. The 5 shadows press against his mind: disbelief, division, desecration, despair, deception. They are not abstractions. They are faces he has met, letters he has read, scandals he has tried to heal. He sleeps little. His staff grows worried. One evening, as lightning flickers on the far horizon, his confessor finds him on his knees, forehead touching the floor. This cannot stay in these walls, Leo says without looking up. If I keep this vision as a private devotion, it will rot in me. It must become a path. What path? The confessor asks softly. A way of the cross, the Pope answers. Not for show. For truth. I must go where the shadows are thickest. Not in palaces. In ruins. The confessor's heart tightens. You are not young, he says. Your body. My body collapsed beneath the chalice, Leo replies, finally lifting his head. It can collapse in the dust as well. He leaves without warning. No press release. No motorcade. No balcony wave. One morning, just before dawn, he steps out of a side door of the Apostolic Palace wearing a simple white cassock and a small wooden cross around his neck. His ornate shoes are gone. His bare feet touch the cold stone. A single aide hurries after him, trying to hand him a pair of sandals. Holy Father, you cannot. I must, Leo says, not unkindly, and keeps walking. Security is summoned, but he refuses the armored vehicle, the escort, the spectacle. I am going as a pilgrim, he says. Not a head of state. News reaches the Swiss Guard barracks like a lightning strike. The Pope is walking, someone gasps. Barefoot. Within an hour, grainy photos begin to appear on social media. An old man in white walking along a quiet road outside Rome, 2 or 3 priests behind him, no flag, no fanfare. His feet are dusty. His head is bowed. Rome erupts. TV hosts scramble for footage. Commentators argue about symbolism. Is he protesting something? Is he ill? Is this a stunt? Vatican officials, caught off guard, issue a statement that says almost nothing. The Holy Father has chosen to undertake a private time of prayer, it reads. We ask the faithful to accompany him with their prayers. It does not mention his feet. The path he chooses is not grand. He walks through small villages, past fields and shuttered shops, near half-empty churches and crowded cafes. In one town, he stops before a graffitied wall bearing the words, "God is a story we tell children." He traces the sentence with his eyes, then kneels on the pavement and silently prays. First it is just the priests and guards behind him. Then, in the next village, a woman closing her bakery for the day recognizes him. Illinois Papa, she whispers, stunned. She does not bow. She does not ask for a selfie. she simply steps out of her doorway and begins to walk behind him, apron still dusted with flour. In the next town, two teenagers on scooters pull up, laughing, until they see his face. The laughter dies. They park their scooters and follow at a distance. By the third day, dozens trail him. Farmers, housewives, office workers who have taken the day off. A man in an expensive suit walking barefoot, shoes in hand. A child holding his grandmother's hand, asking loud questions that adults are too afraid to voice. "Where are we going?" the boy calls. Leo XIV turns, smiling faintly. "To a place that remembers fire," he says. The destination is a ruined monastery clinging to the side of a hill, known locally as the Mountain of Ashes. Centuries ago, it was a thriving community of monks. Then came wars, neglect, rumors of corruption, a final blaze that gutted its cloister. Since then, it has been left to the elements, a skeleton of stone, a haunt for weeds and ghosts of psalms. The sky darkens as they approach. Clouds gather with the deliberate grace of a curtain being drawn. The air grows heavy, the kind of thick stillness that makes old injuries ache. Thunder rolls in the distance, a slow, guttural sound. The pilgrims, because that is what they are now, whether they meant to be or not, hesitate at the base of the hill. Leo XIV does not. He climbs, each step a small defiance against age and gravity. His bare feet slip on loose stones. A young man reaches out to steady him. The Pope accepts the arm with a nod, then lets go as soon as he can. They reach the monastery courtyard just as the first drops of rain begin to fall. It is a hollow space, open to the sky, ringed by charred arches. In the center stands a weather-beaten wooden cross, half forgotten, leaning slightly, scarred by the fire that did not manage to consume it entirely. Leo walks to it as if to an old friend. He lays his hand on the cracked wood. "This place," he says softly, more to the cross than to the people, burned from the inside before it burned from the outside. Thunder grumbles overhead, closer now. The crowd presses in around the edges of the courtyard, unsure how close to come. A young woman begins to sing under her breath, not a hymn, not a song with words, just a low, tremulous line of sound, like a single thread thrown into the air. Someone else joins her on a different note. The voices weave without plan. Rain begins in earnest. It beads on the Pope's white cassock, darkening it in patches. A bolt of lightning splits the sky in the distance, accompanied by a crack so loud several people scream. Then it happens. A second bolt, closer, slams into the ground at the far edge of the courtyard with a blinding flash. The air explodes with light and heat. Instinct takes over, people drop, cover their heads, cry out. Leo XIV does not fall. The shock throws him back a step, but he remains upright, one hand still on the cross. In the stunned silence that follows, someone notices it first. The cross, a voice gasps. Guardate la croce. The wood beneath the Pope's palm is glowing. Not on the surface, like something catching fire, but from within, as if a hidden ember has been awakened. The glow spreads slowly, veins of light moving through the grain, pulsing in a rhythm that looks unnervingly like a heartbeat. Up the beam. Across the arms. Down toward the base. It is not the wild, devouring light of lightning. It is gentle, steady, alive. Someone falls to their knees. Then another. And another. Soon the entire courtyard is a field of bent backs and covered heads, all eyes fixed on the impossible cross. The air hums, not with electricity now, but with something older. Leo XIV stands barefoot in the mud, rain trailing down his face like tears. He lifts his hand slowly from the wood. The light remains, continuing its quiet pulse, as if the cross has decided to remember that it once held a living man. The Pope's voice, when he speaks, is barely more than a whisper. He is not angry, he says. The words travel outward, carried by the wind, by recording phones, by trembling lips that will repeat them in kitchens and chapels around the world. He is waiting. That night, footage from the Mountain of Ashes floods every corner of the globe. Some videos are grainy, shot through curtains of rain, but the central image is unmistakable, an old man in white before a cross that glows like a heart in the wreckage of a forgotten monastery, lightning scars still smoking in the mud. Experts are summoned. Physicists talk about residual charges, camera artifacts, pareidolia. Fire investigators argue about the flammability of old wood in wet conditions. Theories bloom and wither by the hour. Believers do not wait for consensus. They see the 5 shadows in the news, the burned cathedral, the trembling city, the silent satellites, the restless relic, and now, at last, a sign that is not a wound but a wound lit from within. The world, already unsettled by wars and storms and headlines that feel like omens, watches the Mountain of Ashes and asks, some in fear, some in hope. What, exactly, did the Pope see in those 7 minutes at the altar? And why does it feel as if, for the first time in a very long time, heaven is answering back? The footage from the Mountain of Ashes does not fade. It loops, on phones, on televisions, on the back walls of bars and parishes and airport lounges. People watch it in silence, an old man in white, barefoot in the rain, standing before a cross that glows like a living heart. For a while, the world does what it always does with miracles, it argues. Then something else happens. They begin as small gatherings. In a dusty barrio on the outskirts of a South American city, 3 nuns kneel in the rubble of a half-demolished chapel. They have no hymnals, no microphones. They simply close their eyes and let out a single, raw tone, not a melody, not quite harmony, just the sound of grief that has finally discovered it is allowed to speak. A child playing outside hears them and wanders in. He does not know the words to any church song, but he knows how to hum. He sits on the broken step and joins them, a high, thin strand of sound weaving through their lower voices. In a refugee camp, a woman from a country the mapmakers keep renaming stands in a line for water. Someone's phone, balanced on a crate, plays the clip of the Mountain of Ashes yet again. When the cross begins to glow, the woman feels something crack open in her chest. She sets down her bucket, closes her eyes, and begins to hum under her breath. The man behind her takes a breath and adds a single sustained note of his own. Soon the whole line is singing without words, just syllables and breath and the occasional sob disguised as a change in pitch. No one conducts. No one records. It sounds like mourning and hope braided together. A farmer in Poland, a student in Seoul, an elder in a village church in Ghana, a nurse on a night shift in Dublin, they all find themselves doing the same thing within days of one another, stepping into ruined places, alleys, chapels, deserts, and humming. No leader announces it. No movement trademarks it. People simply gather. In side streets and subway stations and fields under power lines, in bombed-out sanctuaries and overcrowded tenements and office stairwells. They stand shoulder to shoulder, strangers, and let their throats produce sounds too simple to be called songs and too deep to be anything else. Someone, somewhere, gives it a name that sticks. It is not technically a choir. There are no rehearsals, no music stands, no auditions. Just nuns and children, farmers and students, widows and truck drivers, the unemployed and the overworked, filling the broken edges of the world with wordless chants. A global spiritual heartbeat has begun to sound. The sky is the next to answer. On an otherwise ordinary evening, as the sun sinks behind the dome of St. Peter's, the clouds over Rome begin to twist. At first it looks like an approaching storm, wisps curling around a central mass, grey on grey. Tourists take pictures because tourists always take pictures. Pilgrims look up because pilgrims always look up. Then the lines sharpen. Two long banks of cloud intersect, one vertical, one horizontal, not in the random fashion of weather but with the slow, deliberate movement of something being written. Light pours along the intersection, outlining a shape that every Christian on earth recognizes before they admit it. A cross, luminous, hanging over the city. No one is sure where the first whisper comes from. Some say a woman near the obelisk hears it inside her own chest, as if spoken just behind her heart. Others insist a child says it out loud, in a language he barely knows. A few swear they hear it in the wind itself, threading through the rustle of clothes and camera shutters. However it arrives, the phrase passes through the crowd with the strange cohesion of a single breath. Return to me. People stop walking. Some fall to their knees on the cobblestones without meaning to. Others stand frozen, mouths parted, as if someone has just handed them back a name they'd forgotten they'd lost. In observatories half a world away, scientists troubleshoot equipment. A rhythmic spike has appeared in multiple data streams, a pulse in cosmic rays, a fluctuation in background radiation, depending on which report you read. It repeats at the same interval over and over, like a drum. When one young astrophysicist, exhausted and a little giddy, measures it precisely, he goes cold. It matches resting human heart rate, he murmurs. Almost exactly. His colleagues roll their eyes, tell him to get some sleep. The data does not sleep. Over several nights, amateur stargazers begin to share images online. In one region of the sky, a cluster of stars seems to strengthen, as if some invisible hand has wiped away a thin film between them and human eyes. Four of the brightest points, when connected by simple imagination, form a crude, unmistakable word in Latin. Amor. Not everyone sees it. Not everyone wants to. But enough do that the images spread, a universe spelling love above a world staggering beneath its absence. Inside the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV does not see the cross over Rome with his own eyes. He is in his private chapel, on his knees on the stone floor, when the second collapse comes. There is no chalice in his hands this time, no cameras, no cardinals. Just an old man bent double in the half-dark, whispering prayers for a world that has begun to hum to itself. He feels it before his muscles give way, a deep, interior tug, like a tide going out. Not yet, he breathes. Please. There is more to say. Then the room tilts. He crumples, his cheek hitting the floor, breath knocked out of him. Pain darts through his chest, sharp and bright. For a few seconds, there is only the white noise of a body in distress. When he wakes, there is an oxygen tube at his nose, a nurse by his side, his confessor holding his hand. "Holy Father, you must rest," the nurse murmurs, voice professional but shaken. "You've had another." "Paper," Leo rasps. "Pen." His confessor hesitates only a moment before reaching for both. The Pope's hand trembles as he writes, the letters unsteady but legible. He pauses often, not for effect, but to fight for breath between sentences. He writes of the world as a cracked chalice. Once whole, once able to hold love without leaking. Now fissured by the five shadows, by disbelief and division and desecration and despair and deception. Not shattered beyond repair, but unable to pretend it is unbroken. He writes of what is coming. Not an apocalypse of fire raining from the sky, not a tally of the damned, but something stranger and more terrifying to a culture addicted to numbness. The fire to come is love, not destruction, he scrawls. It will burn away what is false. It will not annihilate, but reveal. The world is not ending, it is being invited. Invited to let itself be remade. The effort nearly undoes him. When he drops the pen, his hand smears a line of ink across the margin. His confessor takes the page as one might take a newborn, awkwardly, reverently, afraid of dropping something that does not belong to him. "This is my testament," Leo whispers. Not a program. A plea. He dies at dawn 2 days later. The window of his simple bedroom has been left unlatched at his request. A faint, narrow cross of light falls across the opposite wall, not bright enough to be the sun, not sharp enough to be a reflection. Just a thin, persistent radiance, as if the night itself has decided to make the sign of the faith he carried. The nurse steps out for a moment. When she returns, his breathing has stopped. He is facing the window, eyes closed, a half-smile at the corner of his mouth, as if he has just heard a joke that only he and God understand. His hands rest loosely on the blanket. On the windowsill sits his rosary, coiled neatly, its crucifix angled toward the light. No one remembers placing it there. News of his death ripples outward. The official announcement speaks of a peaceful passing and a life poured out in service. It does not mention the cross of light that did not vanish when his heart stopped. It does not mention the nurse who, days later, still has the sense that the room is listening. In the papal chapel, a single sunbeam detaches itself from the ordinary geometry of mourning and settles on the altar. Hours pass. The beam does not move. Even as the day advances and the angle of the sun shifts, it remains fixed, a narrow band of gold on white linen, as if time has adjusted itself to avoid disturbing it. A candle before the tabernacle, lit on the night of his death, refuses to go out. Wicks should collapse. Wax should drown. Drafts should do their work. This one burns with a small, steady flame that bends but never breaks, night after night, to the point where the sacristan, unnerved, replaces it with a new candle, which behaves the same. Across cities and villages, people begin to report something else. Not apparitions. Not trumpets. Just lights. Soft, persistent flickers in places where people have started to gather and hum, above a subway entrance where commuters have begun to stop and sing before work, at the edge of a refugee camp, in the rafters of a ruined church, over a crossroads where strangers light candles and apologize to each other without being quite sure why. They appear on camera sometimes as glitches, as lens flares, as annoying artifacts to be edited out. But those who stand beneath them describe the same sensation. It felt, one woman says, searching for words on a late-night talk show, like being noticed. Not judged. Not applauded. Just seen. The mountain of ashes becomes a river's source. At first, it is a trickle, small groups of pilgrims climbing the hill, leaving flowers, touching the now dark cross that glowed that first night. Then buses begin to arrive. Then trains, their schedules quietly adjusted to accommodate extra stops. Within months, millions have come. They do not all believe the same things. Some are devout. Some are furious with God, but come anyway. Some do not know why they are there at all, only that when they saw the old man standing barefoot in the rain, something in them stood up too. The choir of dust swells. What was once a handful of voices in forgotten places becomes a tide. The wordless chants rise now from airports and stadiums, from protest marches and candlelight vigils, from penitentiaries and parliaments. Sometimes they are dissonant, sometimes achingly beautiful, always rooted in the same thing, an ache that refuses to stay silent. The Vatican, for the first time in a long time, does not try to organize it. There are no official slogans, no logos, no campaigns. When asked, the new pope, a quieter man who knows he stands in the shadow of a glowing cross, simply says, "If the Spirit wishes to lead the people into ruins to sing, who am I to stop him?" Leo XIV's testament, the page with its smeared ink and cracked chalice imagery, is published. It travels faster than any encyclical. Translated into dozens of languages, cut into quotes for posters and posts, whispered at bedsides and shouted at rallies, it spread more quickly in death than any homily of his did in life. The fire to come is love, not destruction, becomes a phrase scribbled in school notebooks, painted on alley walls, printed on the backs of holy cards, tattooed on arms that once bore only the story of despair. The five shadows have not vanished. Disbelief, division, desecration, despair, deception still stalk the earth. Wars continue. Scandals surface. Storms make landfall. The world has not been neatly solved. But something has shifted. People have begun to recognize the shadows for what they are, not inevitabilities, but illnesses. Not destinies, but distortions. And where there is diagnosis, there is the possibility of healing. More and more, when they speak of the morning the Pope fell at the altar, they do not call it collapse. They call it the first tremor of something vast. Heaven, they begin to say, did not bend low with a clenched fist, but with an open hand. Not with wrath, but with invitation. And so the word awakening takes shape on tongues that never thought they would speak of God again without irony. On a morning some years after his death, a group of pilgrims stands once more at the Mountain of Ashes. They have come from different continents, carrying different languages, different kinds of pain. The monastery stones are the same, scarred, blackened, stubborn. The wooden cross in the courtyard is silent and dark, just old wood now, rough beneath the fingers that touch it. Dawn gathers slowly. As the first light spills over the hills, the sky above them brightens, not in a sudden blaze, but in a slow, steady flushing of color. High overhead, Thin clouds begin to arrange themselves, not as dramatically as that first night over Rome, but enough that those with eyes to see can make it out. A faint cross, pulsing gently, as if the sky itself is remembering how to breathe. No voice booms. No angel descends. Only the wind, carrying the sounds of people beginning, one by one, to hum. The narrator's voice, whether heard in a film, read on a page, or felt in the quiet of a heart that has finally stopped running, speaks the words that have become the story's final truth. The world was shaken. Because one man dared to remember love. Subscribe before the next drop begins. Comment your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next drop.